I'm not on your list. The Duke crossed out a name. You are now. The carriage hit a rut in the road, and Roselin Thorne's head connected sharply with the window frame for the fourth time in as many miles. She bit back the unladylike word that sprang to her lips and pressed her palm against the growing knot above her temple. "Stop fidgeting," Lady Hartwick commanded from the opposite seat, not bothering to open her eyes. "You sound like a horse in a burning stable." "My apologies, my lady. The road seems determined to rearrange my skull." "Your skull is the least of my concerns. Did you remember to pack my evening drops?" "Yes, my lady." "And the morning drops?" "Yes, my lady." "And the afternoon tincture that Dr. Morris prescribed for my nerves?" "All of them, my lady, along with your powders, your pills, your 3 varieties of tea, and the smelling salts you insist upon, despite never having fainted in your 72 years of life." Lady Hartwick opened one eye, pale blue and sharp as a blade despite her age. "Impertinence! I should have left you in London." "You should have," Rosalind agreed pleasantly. "But then, who would remember which drop goes in which eye?" The old woman made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. "The left eye, obviously. The right one is perfectly functional." "The right eye, my lady. The left is the one with adequate vision. We established this after the incident with the inverted lorgnette." Lady Hartwick harumphed and closed her eyes again, settling deeper into the mountain of cushions Rosalind had arranged around her at their last stop. The carriage swayed and jolted onward, carrying them inexorably toward Thornfield Abbey and the week-long house party that awaited them there. A house party. The very words made Rosalind want to laugh, though there was nothing funny about it. She knew perfectly well why they had been invited, or rather, why Lady Hartwick had been invited, and Rosalind had been permitted to accompany her like a piece of particularly inconvenient luggage. Lady Emmeline Hartwick, the old woman's granddaughter, was considered the leading candidate for the position of Duchess of Thornfield, and the Duke apparently wished to inspect his prospective bride's family before committing. As if marriage were a horse auction. As if women were livestock to be evaluated for breeding potential and temperament. Rosalind turned to look out the window at the rolling Derbyshire countryside, green and gold in the late summer light. 5 years ago, she might have been a guest at such a party herself, not a leading candidate for a duke, perhaps, but certainly someone worth inviting. The Honourable Miss Rosalind Thorne, daughter of Viscount Ashbury, possessed of a respectable dowry and acceptable connections. That woman was dead now, buried alongside her father in a grave paid for with the last of the silver. "You're brooding," Lady Hartwick announced without opening her eyes. "I can hear it. That particular quality of silence that means you're wallowing in self-pity." "I never wallow, my lady." "Nonsense. Everyone wallows. The trick is to do it efficiently. 15 minutes in the morning, no more. Then get on with things." The old woman shifted, her joints creaking audibly. "How much longer?" Rosalind consulted the timepiece she kept in her reticule, her mother's, one of the few possessions she had managed to keep from the creditors. "Another hour, perhaps. We should arrive before dark." "Good. I intend to take to my bed immediately and not emerge until tomorrow afternoon. You will inform our host that I am indisposed, but will grace the company with my presence at dinner tomorrow. And if his grace takes offence at your absence, then his grace may take himself directly to hell. I am 72 years old. I have survived 2 husbands and 7 children, and I did not travel 4 hours over roads designed by a sadist to be condescended to by a man young enough to be my grandson." Lady Hartwick paused. "A particularly tiresome grandson at that. Do you know they call him the Calculating Duke?" Rosalind had heard the nickname, though she had never paid much attention to society gossip. It seemed rather a waste of time when one was no longer part of society. "I believe I have heard something to that effect. He keeps lists of everything, potential investments ranked by risk and return, servants evaluated by efficiency, And wives? Lady Hartwick's lip curled. He keeps lists of potential wives, ranked like horses at Tattersalls. My granddaughter is currently the front-runner, apparently. Highest marks for dowry, breeding, and what he reportedly calls temperamental suitability. How romantic. Romance. The word emerged like something sour. The man wouldn't recognize romance if it bit him on his aristocratic posterior. But he has 30,000 a year and one of the oldest titles in England, so Emmeline's mother is determined to see her become a duchess. And she sighed. I am brought along to prove the family is not entirely populated by empty-headed fortune hunters. Are you not? Are you trying to get yourself dismissed? Merely inquiring, my lady. Lady Hartwick was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost contemplative. Emmeline is not stupid. She is simply young, and has been taught that her worth lies in her face and her bloodline. I hope she will grow out of it. I hope this Duke, whoever he is beneath his lists and calculations, might help her grow out of it. A pause. But I am not optimistic. Roselin said nothing. She had learned long ago that hope was a luxury she could not afford, and optimism was for people whose futures held something other than an endless succession of demanding employers and cramped servants' quarters. The carriage hit another rut. Roselin's head connected with the window frame again. "Stop fidgeting," Lady Hartwick said. Thornfield Abbey rose from the Derbyshire landscape like something out of a Gothic novel, all grey stone and towering windows and architectural ambitions that spanned at least 3 centuries of expansion. The original medieval structure was still visible at the core, but it had been added to and built upon so many times that the result was less a unified building than a history of aristocratic excess made manifest in stone. Roselin studied it as their carriage rolled up the long drive, trying not to be impressed. She had grown up in a beautiful house herself once. Beauty could be lost. Beauty could be sold off to pay gambling debts and poor investments. Beauty was as reliable as morning mist. Stop cataloguing its flaws, Lady Hartwick said. I can see you doing it. Yes, the West Wing doesn't match the East Wing. Yes, the Tudor edition was a mistake. It is still one of the finest estates in England, and you will kindly not look at it as though you're calculating how much the stones would fetch at auction. I was doing no such thing. You were absolutely doing that thing. I recognize the expression. You wore it when you first saw my townhouse. Lady Hartwick gathered her shawls around her as the carriage slowed. Help me out. My knees have seized. The next quarter hour was consumed by the complexities of extracting an elderly woman from a carriage, supervising the unloading of luggage, and navigating the small army of servants who emerged to greet them. Roselin moved through it all with the practiced efficiency of long experience, keeping Lady Hartwick steady on her arm while simultaneously ensuring that the correct trunks went to the correct rooms and the medicine case critically important remained in Roselin's personal possession at all times. They were met in the entrance hall by the housekeeper, a severe woman in black bombazine who introduced herself as Mrs. Blackwood and informed them that His Grace was currently occupied with other guests, but would greet Lady Hartwick at dinner the following evening. Lady Hartwick's expression made clear what she thought of a host who did not personally welcome his guests, but she allowed herself to be escorted to her chambers without comment. The rooms assigned to them were handsome, if impersonal, a large bedchamber for Lady Hartwick overlooking the formal gardens, and a smaller room adjoining it for Rosalind. Roselin's room had clearly been intended for a lady's maid rather than a companion, being furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair, but she had slept in far worse accommodations during her 5 years of service. "This will do," Lady Hartwick announced, settling into the chair by the fire that Rosalind had already requested be lit. "Unpack my things, lay out my morning dress for tomorrow, and then you may do as you please until dinner. I intend to sleep for approximately 14 hours. Shall I have a tray sent up? No, yes, perhaps some broth, and toast, and possibly a small glass of sherry for medicinal purposes. Lady Hartwig waved a hand. Use your judgment. You usually do anyway. Roselin spent the next hour unpacking trunks, organizing medicines, arguing with a housemaid about the proper temperature for Lady Hartwig's broth, and generally ensuring that her employer had everything she needed for a comfortable evening. By the time she finally escaped to her own small room, the sun was setting and she was thoroughly exhausted. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and allowed herself exactly 15 minutes of what Lady Hartwig would call wallowing. 5 years. 5 years since her father's death, since the creditors had descended like vultures, since she had sold everything that could be sold and still not had enough to cover his debts. 5 years since Edward Handsome, charming Edward with his pretty speeches about eternal love, had quietly withdrawn his courtship and married a coal merchant's daughter with £40,000 and no inconvenient brothers-in-law demanding payment. 5 years of service to women who needed companionship and couldn't keep servants, of swallowing her pride and her opinions, of being invisible in rooms where she once would have been welcomed as an equal. And here she was at Thornfield Abbey, surrounded by exactly the kind of people she had once been, watching through windows as they lived lives she could no longer access. Her 15 minutes elapsed. Roselin stood, straightened her dress, serviceable grey wool, 5 years out of fashion, and went to find a library. Thornfield Abbey's library was, Roselin had to admit, genuinely impressive. 3 stories of books lined the walls, accessible by a system of rolling ladders and upper galleries that made her fingers itch to explore. She had always loved libraries, loved the smell of old paper and leather, loved the promise contained in thousands of spines, loved the democratic silence of a room where ideas mattered more than bloodlines. The library appeared empty, which was a relief. She had no desire to make conversation with any of the other guests, all of whom would immediately identify her as a companion and either ignore her entirely or subject her to the particular brand of condescension reserved for women who had fallen from their proper station. She wandered through the lower level, trailing her fingers along the spines, reading titles that ranged from classical philosophy to modern agriculture. The collection was eclectic, suggesting that successive Dukes of Thornfield had possessed varied interests, or perhaps simply bought books by the yard to fill the impressive shelves. A narrow door at the far end of the library caught her attention. It stood slightly ajar, and through it she could see the warm glow of candlelight and what appeared to be a more intimate space, a private study perhaps, attached to the main library for the use of the family. She should not investigate. She was a companion, a servant in all but name, and she had no right to wander into the private spaces of a house where she was barely tolerated as a guest. But the door was open, and she could see, through the gap, shelves of what appeared to be novels, her weakness, her one indulgence, the only escape she permitted herself from the grinding monotony of her days. Rosalind glanced behind her. The library remained empty. The house was occupied with dinner preparations for the 20 guests who had already arrived. She could hear, distantly, the sounds of conversation and movement from the main rooms. No one would notice if she simply looked through the doorway. No one would care. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study was smaller than the main library, but far more personal. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, piled with papers. Comfortable chairs flanked a fireplace where a small blaze crackled. And the shelves, she felt her heart lift. The shelves were filled not with improving philosophical texts or agricultural treatises, but with novels. Novels by the dozens, perhaps hundreds. The complete works of several authors she loved, and many more she had never been able to afford or find. She was reaching for a volume of Anne Radcliffe when she realized she was not alone. A man sat at the desk, bent so low over his papers that she had somehow failed to notice him in her initial survey of the room. He was writing intently, his pen moving across the page with methodical precision. Dark hair, prematurely silvered at the temples. Severe profile. Expensive but plain clothing that somehow conveyed authority even from behind. Roselin's stomach dropped. She should leave, immediately. Before he noticed her and, "Did you require something?" His voice was cold, clipped, utterly without warmth. He did not look up from his writing. I beg your pardon." Roselin took a step backward. "I did not realize the room was occupied." "I was only looking for something to read. The main library contains several thousand volumes. I imagine you can find something suitable there." The dismissal was unmistakable. Roselin felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, yes, but also with a spark of something hotter. She had spent 5 years being dismissed, being overlooked, being made to feel that her presence was an inconvenience to be tolerated. She had swallowed her pride so many times it should have been easy by now. It was not easy. "The main library appears to be organized primarily for display rather than reading," she heard herself say. "I was hoping to find something slightly less impressive." Now he looked up. Grey eyes, cold as winter slate, assessed her with an expression that suggested she was a minor administrative problem requiring resolution. His face might have been handsome if there had been any warmth in it. Strong jaw, aristocratic cheekbones, the kind of features that portrayed well in oil paintings. But there was something closed off about him, something that made her think of doors locked against intruders and windows shuttered against light. "You are Lady Hartwick's companion." It was not a question. "Miss Thorne, Roselin Thorne. Miss Thorne." He set down his pen with the air of a man being forced to attend to an unpleasant task. "The main library is available to all guests. This study is private. I trust you can appreciate the distinction." "Perfectly, Your Grace." She had guessed, of course, the moment she saw him. Who else would be sitting in the Duke of Thornfield's private study, writing with such proprietary confidence? But the confirmation still sent a small shock through her. She was standing in the private rooms of one of the most powerful men in England, having intruded uninvited, and he was looking at her as though she were a servant who had forgotten to knock, which, she supposed, was precisely what she was. "Then we understand each other." He picked up his pen again. "Good evening, Miss Thorne." She should have left. She should have curtsied and apologized and retreated to the main library to select something suitably inoffensive and spent the remainder of the evening in her cramped little room, reading by inadequate candlelight and remembering her place. But his pen was moving again, and something about the document he was writing caught her attention. A list. Columns of names, accompanied by numbers and abbreviated notes. She could make out a few words from where she stood. Dowry, connections, temperament. Lady Hartwick's voice echoed in her memory. "He keeps lists of potential wives, ranked like horses at Tattersall's." The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield, looked up. His expression could have frozen the Thames in August. "Is something amusing, Miss Thorne?" She should apologize. She should flee. She should remember that she was one sharp word away from dismissal, that Lady Hartwick was her only source of income, that her sister Sarah depended on the small sums Rosalind managed to send her each month. "Your spelling," Rosalind said instead. "You have written tractable. It is spelled with an A, tractable." The silence that followed was absolute. The Duke of Thornfield stared at her. Rosalind stared back, some mad demon of self-destruction preventing her from looking away or apologizing or doing any of the sensible things that might salvage this situation. "I beg your pardon?" His voice was very quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "The word tractable in your notes about Lady Emmeline." Roselin nodded toward the paper. "You have misspelled it. I thought you should know, given that it seems to be an important criterion in your evaluation." For a long moment the Duke did not move. Then, slowly, he looked down at the document before him, looked at the word in question, looked back up at Rosalind. "You are correcting my spelling. I am pointing out an error. Whether you correct it is entirely your affair. In a private document, which you left visible on a desk in a room with an open door. One might argue you were inviting commentary. One might argue," the Duke said, "that wandering into private rooms and critiquing one's host's correspondence is grounds for immediate removal from the premises. One might." Rosalin's heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. "Although I would note that I was not critiquing your correspondence, merely your orthography, and your methodology, I suppose, though that would require more time than I imagine you wish to spare." "My methodology? For selecting a wife? Ranking women by dowry and temperament assessment seems rather—" She searched for a word that would not get her immediately thrown out. "Reductive." The Duke set down his pen. He rose from his chair. He was taller than she had expected, and when he moved around the desk toward her, Rosalind had to fight the urge to step back. She held her ground through sheer stubbornness, tilting her chin up to maintain eye contact. "Miss Thorne," his voice was silk over ice, "you are a companion, a servant in evening dress, if you will forgive the bluntness. You have intruded into my private study, read my private papers, corrected my spelling, and critiqued my approach to matrimony. Have I missed anything?" "You have also failed to offer me a chair," Rosalind said, "though under the circumstances I suppose that oversight is understandable." Something flickered in those grey eyes. Not warmth, nothing so human, but perhaps a kind of recognition, as if he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. "Who are you?" The question seemed involuntary, stripped of his previous coldness. "I told you, Miss Rosalind Thorne, companion to Lady Hartwick." "No, that is what you do. I asked who you are." He was closer now, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Ladies' companions do not wander into private studies and critique dukes. Ladies' companions apologize and grovel and retreat. You have done none of those things." "Would you prefer it if I did?" "I would prefer," he said slowly, "to understand why you have not." The honest answer was that she did not know. That something about this man, about his coldness and his lists, and his absolute certainty that the world should arrange itself according to his specifications, had awakened a recklessness she thought she had buried years ago. That she was tired, so desperately tired of being invisible, of swallowing her words, of pretending to be less than she was. But she could not say any of that. "Perhaps I simply forgot," she said instead. "It has been a long journey, and my head has been rattled rather thoroughly by your Derbyshire roads. If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I believe I have trespassed on your hospitality long enough." She turned to leave. "Miss Thorne." She stopped, but did not turn around. "You are not on the list," he said. "The list of guests, I mean. I reviewed it this morning. Lady Hartwick is invited. Her granddaughter, Lady Emmeline, is invited. You are not." Now she did turn. "Companions are rarely listed. We are assumed, like luggage." "I see." The Duke moved back to his desk, picked up his pen, and with deliberate precision crossed out a name on the document before him. Then, in the space created, he wrote something new. "What are you doing?" "Adding you." He looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw the ghost of something that might have been a smile at the corners of his mouth. "You are now on the list, Miss Thorne. The guest list," he clarified, as though she might have misunderstood. "Not the other one. You lack a fortune and your temperament is clearly appalling." "Thank you for the clarification." "You are welcome." He sat back down, his attention already returning to his papers. "The main library is available until midnight. I suggest you make use of it. Good evening." This time, Roselin did leave. She walked through the library in a daze, selected a novel at random from the shelves, and retreated to her small room, where she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She had insulted a duke, mocked his courtship methods, corrected his spelling, and instead of dismissing her, instead of having her thrown out as he had every right to do, he had added her name to his guest list. It made no sense. Nothing about the Duke of Thornfield made sense, and Rosalind, who had spent 5 years making herself invisible, found that she could not stop thinking about those cold grey eyes and the moment, just for an instant, when they had seemed to see her. She dreamed that night of lists, endless columns of names and numbers scrolling across parchment, her own name appearing and disappearing among them, sometimes at the top and sometimes at the bottom, and sometimes crossed out entirely. She woke before dawn with a headache and the unsettling certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. Lady Hartwick kept her busy throughout the morning, requiring assistance with correspondence, with dressing, with the endless small tasks that filled an elderly woman's days. By the time Rosalind was free to think her own thoughts, it was nearly noon, and Lady Emmeline had arrived. The Duke's preferred candidate for Duchess was everything Rosalind was not: beautiful, wealthy, impeccably dressed, and possessed of a serene confidence that came from never having doubted her place in the world. She swept into Lady Hartwick's chambers in a cloud of French perfume and muslin, embraced her grandmother with carefully calculated affection, and proceeded to ignore Rosalind entirely. "The Duke is everything amiable," Lady Emmeline reported, settling into the chair by the fire as though it were a throne. "He received us most graciously yesterday evening and spoke to me for nearly 15 minutes. Mamma is certain he means to make an offer before the week is out." "Is she?" Lady Hartwick's voice was dry. "Everyone says so. Lady Ashton told Mamma that the Duke has never invited the same lady to 2 consecutive house parties, and this is my 3rd. Clearly his intentions are fixed. Or he simply has a limited imagination when compiling guest lists." Lady Emmeline's perfect brow creased slightly. "I do not take your meaning, grandmother." "No, I don't suppose you do." Lady Hartwick glanced at Rosalind, and something in her expression, was it warning, amusement, concern, made Rosalind's skin prickle. "Emmeline, dear, you look tired. Why don't you rest before this afternoon's activities? Miss Thorne will escort you to your rooms." Rosalind had no desire to escort Lady Emmeline anywhere, but she rose obediently and held the door open. Lady Emmeline swept past her without acknowledgement, and Rosalind followed, maintaining the precisely appropriate distance of a servant trailing her better. "The 2nd floor," Lady Emmeline said without looking back. "The Blue Suite." Of course it was the Blue Suite, the finest guest accommodation in the house, positioned directly across from the Duke's own chambers. Rosalind navigated the corridors silently, trying not to think about the fact that she was guiding her employer's granddaughter toward a man she had insulted not 12 hours earlier. They were nearly at the stairs when Lady Emmeline stopped abruptly and turned. "You were here last night," she said. "I saw your name added to the guest register. Thornfield." Rosalind kept her expression neutral. "Lady Hartwick requires assistance. I go where she goes. Companions are not typically listed as guests. They sleep in the servants' quarters and take their meals in the housekeeper's parlour." Lady Emmeline's perfect blue eyes were suddenly cold. "Yet here you are on the guest list, occupying a room in the family wing, as though you were someone of consequence." "I believe there was a clerical error. His Grace added my name himself." "His Grace?" Lady Emmeline's tone sharpened. "You have spoken with the Duke?" Too late, Rosalind realized her mistake. She should have said nothing. Should have let Lady Emmeline believe whatever she wished about clerical errors and administrative oversights. Instead, She had revealed that she had interacted with the Duke, the man Lady Emmeline was determined to marry in some private capacity. "Briefly," Roselin said. "A chance encounter in the library. He wished to clarify my status in the household." "Your status?" Lady Emmeline moved closer, and Roselin saw something ugly beneath the beautiful surface, a jealousy quick to kindle and slow to forget. "Let me clarify it for you, Miss Thorne. You are a companion, a servant with pretensions. Your father was a gambler who died in debt. Your family name is ruined, and the only reason you are tolerated in decent society is because my grandmother has inexplicably taken pity on you." Each word landed like a blow, but Rosalind had practice at absorbing blows. She kept her face smooth, her voice even. "I am aware of my circumstances, Lady Emmeline." "Then you should also be aware that the Duke of Thornfield is not for the likes of you. He is engaged in selecting a duchess from among the finest families in England. He is not in the market for a penniless nobody with a sharp tongue and a dubious reputation. I have no designs on the Duke, I assure you. See that you don't." Lady Emmeline smiled, and it was a smile that promised consequences. "My grandmother may find you useful, but grandmothers are elderly. Their health is unreliable, and should anything happen to require a new companion, I wonder who might be tasked with providing references." She turned and continued toward the blue suite, leaving Rosalind standing in the corridor with her hands clenched at her sides and her heart pounding with suppressed fury. 5 years. 5 years of this. Of being dismissed and threatened and put in her place by women who had never known a moment's uncertainty about their own worth. 5 years of swallowing her pride and lowering her eyes and remembering that she had a sister who depended on her. That anger was a luxury she could not afford. She was so tired of being invisible. That evening, Lady Hartwick made her promised appearance at dinner. Rosalind helped her dress in her finest black silk, arranged her silver hair in an elegant knot, and escorted her to the drawing-room where the guests had assembled before the meal. The room was a sea of silk and jewels, of aristocratic faces and polished conversation. Rosalind positioned herself in Lady Hartwick's shadow, the appropriate location for a companion, and watched the proceedings with the detached interest of someone viewing a play from the cheap seats. The Duke of Thornfield stood near the fireplace, surrounded by a cluster of admiring mothers and marriageable daughters. He was dressed immaculately in black evening clothes, his dark hair gleaming in the candlelight, his face arranged in an expression of polite attentiveness that did not reach his eyes. Those eyes, Rosalind noticed, were moving constantly, scanning the room, assessing, cataloguing. When they reached her corner, they stopped. For a heartbeat, perhaps two, the Duke of Thornfield looked directly at Rosalind Thorne. His expression did not change. He gave no sign of recognition or acknowledgement. But something in that grey gaze made her breath catch, made her pulse stumble. Then he looked away, returning his attention to the young lady who was laughing at something he had not actually said. "He saw you," Lady Hartwick murmured, her voice barely audible above the conversation around them. "Interesting. He saw a companion standing in the corner. I doubt he registered anything more." "Do you? Then you are not as observant as I believed." Lady Hartwick's grip tightened on Rosalind's arm. "Help me to a chair. My legs are protesting this standing about." Rosalind guided her employer to a settee near the window, settling her among cushions with practiced efficiency. She was arranging Lady Hartwick's shawls when a shadow fell across them both. "Lady Hartwick." The Duke's voice was smooth, formal, betraying nothing. "I am pleased you were able to join us. I trust your journey was not too taxing." "It was appalling." Lady Hartwick did not bother with pleasantries. "Your roads should be shot, Your Grace. They have committed violence against my spine." Something flickered at the corner of the Duke's mouth, that almost smile Rosalind had glimpsed the night before. "I shall have words with the roads at the earliest opportunity. May I bring you refreshment? A glass of sherry, perhaps? You may. Your housekeeper has hidden the good sherry in the wrong cabinet. I had to send my companion to find it yesterday, and she was forced to search through 3 different sideboards. My apologies. I shall ensure it is more prominently displayed in future. The Duke turned, and his gaze fell on Rosalind with an impact that felt almost physical. Miss Thorne, you found the sherry, I hope? Eventually, Your Grace. And did you find anything else of interest during your explorations? Lady Hartwick's attention sharpened. Rosalind felt the temperature of the conversation shift, felt the undercurrent of something she could not quite name. Only an excellent collection of novels, she said carefully. I must compliment you on your library. The organization is somewhat chaotic, but the selection is impressive. High praise from a woman who corrects spelling for entertainment. Lady Hartwick's head swiveled between them like a spectator at a tennis match. You have met before, she announced. At some point between my retiring last evening and now, you have encountered one another, and something interesting has occurred. The Duke's expression remained perfectly neutral. Miss Thorne and I had a brief conversation about literature. She has strong opinions on the subject of library organization. I have strong opinions on many subjects, Rosalind said, most of which I have learned to keep to myself. Have you indeed? I must have encountered you on an unusual evening then. Lady Hartwick made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a suppressed laugh. Thornfield, I believe my granddaughter is attempting to catch your eye. Perhaps you should attend to her before she strains something. The Duke inclined his head, acknowledging the dismissal with grace. Lady Hartwick, Miss Thorne. His gaze lingered on Rosalind for a moment longer than propriety allowed. Enjoy the evening. He moved away toward the cluster of young women who had been watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. Lady Emmeline's smile was radiant as he approached, but her eyes, when they flickered toward Rosalind, were ice-cold. Well, Lady Hartwick said, that was unexpected. He was being polite. He was being attentive. There is a difference. The old woman studied Rosalind with uncomfortable intensity. What precisely occurred last night, child? I told you. I was looking for something to read. I wandered into his study by mistake. We exchanged words. What kind of words? Rosalind hesitated. I may have corrected his spelling. You! Lady Hartwick broke off, and her face did something Rosalind had never seen before. It crumpled into genuine, uncontrollable laughter. You corrected the Duke of Thornfield's spelling, in his own study, during your first evening as a guest in his house. It seemed relevant at the time. Oh, child. Lady Hartwick wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief. No wonder he cannot stop looking at you. No one has corrected that man about anything in years. He must be completely at sea. He is not looking at me. He is looking at you constantly. Every time he thinks no one is watching, his eyes find you in this room. I have been observing him for 10 minutes, and he has not once looked at my granddaughter with the same intensity. Lady Hartwick's amusement faded into something more serious. Be careful, Rosalind. Emmeline has noticed too. The dinner gong sounded before Rosalind could respond. The guests began their procession toward the dining room, rank and precedence determining the order of their movements. Rosalind helped Lady Hartwick to her feet and prepared to escort her to the lower end of the table, where companions and poor relations were typically seated, but the Duke intercepted them at the doorway. Lady Hartwick, allow me. He offered his arm to the elderly woman with formal courtesy. Miss Thorne, you will find your seat at table beside Mrs. Ashworth. I have adjusted the arrangements slightly. Mrs. Ashworth, Rosalind knew, was the wife of a wealthy baronet and a woman of significant social standing. A companion would never normally be seated beside her. The placement was a message, though, to whom and saying what, Rosalind could not determine. She watched the Duke escort Lady Hartwick toward the dining room, his tall form bending attentively to catch the old woman's words. Just before he disappeared through the doorway, he glanced back over his shoulder. Those grey eyes met hers. And something in Roselin's chest, something she had believed safely buried, stirred to life. The days that followed established a pattern that Rosalind could not quite explain. The Duke of Thornfield paid court to Lady Emmeline with meticulous propriety. He walked with her in the gardens. He partnered her at cards. He sat beside her at dinner and made polished conversation about music and weather and the upcoming hunting season. But his eyes, whenever Rosalind entered a room, found her first. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself that 5 years of invisibility had made her hungry for attention, and she was reading significance into coincidental glances. She threw herself into her duties with Lady Hartwick, organized medicine schedules, wrote correspondence, and tried very hard not to notice when the Duke of Thornfield was near. On the third evening, Lady Hartwick took ill. It began during dinner a slight flush, a trembling hand, a sudden inability to follow conversation. Rosalind noticed immediately and was on her feet before any of the other guests registered that something was wrong. "My lady." She kept her voice low, moving to Lady Hartwick's side with the speed of long practice. "Are you unwell?" "Dizzy." The old woman's face was pale, her breathing shallow. "The room is spinning." Rosalind did not hesitate. She signalled to a footman, quietly arranged for Lady Hartwick to be helped from the table, and managed the entire operation with such smooth efficiency that most of the guests barely noticed the disruption. The Duke noticed. He appeared at her side as she was guiding Lady Hartwick toward the stairs, his expression concerned in a way she had not seen before. "What has happened? Is she ill?" "I believe it may be her heart." Rosalind kept her voice steady, though her own heart was racing. "She has had episodes before. I need to get her to bed and send for her physician's instructions. My own physician is in residence. Dr. Mercer, he can attend her immediately." "That would be most helpful. She will need quiet and rest. If you could ensure we are not disturbed." "Of course." The Duke moved ahead of them, clearing the way, opening doors, doing a dozen small tasks that a duke should never have to perform. When they reached Lady Hartwick's chambers, he stayed at the door as Rosalind helped her employer into bed. "Miss Thorne." She looked up from arranging pillows. "You handled that admirably," he said. "Most people would have panicked." "Panic is rarely useful, Your Grace." "No, it is not." He hesitated, and for a moment he looked almost human, uncertain, concerned, stripped of his usual armoured composure. "If there is anything you need, anything at all, you have only to ask." "Thank you." He nodded and withdrew, closing the door behind him. Rosalind turned back to Lady Hartwick, who was watching her with an expression of exhausted amusement. "Well," the old woman said weakly, "that was rather gallant of him. He was being a courteous host. He was being concerned. About you, not about me." Lady Hartwick closed her eyes. "My granddaughter will be furious." The physician arrived within minutes, a competent man who examined Lady Hartwick thoroughly and prescribed rest, careful diet, and a modification to her usual medicines. The episode had not been her heart after all, he determined, but a reaction to some ingredient in the dinner. She would recover fully with a few days' rest. Rosalind stayed at her bedside through the night, dozing in a chair and waking at every small sound. When morning came and Lady Hartwick was sleeping peacefully, she finally allowed herself to leave the room for fresh air. The garden was empty at this hour, the other guests not yet risen for the day. Rosalind walked along the gravel paths, breathing in the cool morning air, trying to quiet the anxiety that still hummed through her veins. She was sitting on a bench near the rose garden when she heard footsteps approaching. "You did not sleep." The Duke stood on the path, dressed for riding, his dark hair disordered by wind. He looked younger in the early morning light, less armoured, almost approachable. Lady Hartwick required supervision. She is better this morning. I inquired with Mrs. Blackwood. Yes, the physician believes she will recover fully. He did not leave. Instead, he moved closer, taking a seat on the far end of the bench as though such informality were perfectly normal. You care for her. She is my employer. That is not what I asked. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said finally. I care for her. She is demanding and difficult and occasionally cruel, but she is also honest. In 5 years, she has never once pretended to be anything other than what she is. That is a rare quality. It is. She looked at him directly, abandoning the pretense of servant and master. Why are you here, Your Grace? I saw you from my window. You looked troubled. And you felt compelled to investigate? I felt compelled to ensure you were well. He paused, and something in his expression shifted, became more open, more uncertain. I am not accustomed to feeling compelled about anything. You are disruptive. I believe you mean impertinent. I mean disruptive. You have disrupted my concentration, my schedules, my carefully ordered existence. His voice was quiet, almost wondering. I have not slept properly in 3 days. I cannot focus on the documents I should be reviewing, and I find myself inventing reasons to be in rooms where you might also be present. Rosalind's heart was beating very fast. Your Grace. Sebastian. The word emerged as though pulled from him against his will. My name is Sebastian, and before you remind me of the impropriety, I am aware that dukes do not invite ladies' companions to use their Christian names. I am aware that everything about this conversation is irregular. I am aware. He stopped, took a breath, and when he continued, his voice was raw. I have spent my entire life being aware of what is appropriate, what is expected, what must be done. I am very tired of awareness. The silence stretched between them, thick with words neither could quite say. I should go, Rosalind whispered. Lady Hartwick will wake soon. Yes, you should go. But he did not move, and neither did she. This is impossible, she said. You know it is impossible. I know nothing of the kind. I only know that you laughed at my spelling errors and challenged my methodology and looked at me as though I were a man rather than a title, and I cannot seem to forget any of it. You are supposed to be courting Lady Emmeline. I am supposed to be selecting a suitable duchess. Lady Emmeline is merely the current front-runner on a list that suddenly seems absurd. His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Tell me to stop, Miss Thorne. Tell me this is madness, that you have no interest in a man who ranks potential wives like investments, that I should return to my lists and my logic and forget I ever saw copper hair in my study doorway. Tell me, he said, and I will leave you in peace. I will court Lady Emmeline. I will select a suitable duchess. I will live the life I was born to live and never trouble you again. She should say it. She should tell him to go. She should remember that she was penniless and ruined and had a sister who depended on her, that hope was dangerous and wanting things was a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she said, I cannot. Cannot what? Cannot tell you to stop. Her voice was barely audible. Because I have spent 3 days trying to forget that conversation in your study, and I cannot do that either. Something in his face changed, softened, became almost vulnerable. Then we are both in trouble, he said quietly. The morning light was growing stronger, the sounds of the house beginning to stir. In a few moments, servants would be about, and guests would be waking, and whatever fragile understanding had formed between them would have to be hidden away. I need to go, Rosalind said again. Yes. This time he stood, offering his hand to help her rise. The contact was brief, gloved fingers, touching gloved fingers, but it burned through her like lightning. "Miss Thorne, your Grace, Rosalind." Her name in his mouth was a revelation. "I find I cannot cross your name off after all." She looked up at him, at this impossible man with his cold eyes, and his hidden depths, and his lists that suddenly meant nothing, and felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "I should warn you," she said. "My temperament is appalling." "So I have been informed." And there it was at last, a real smile, small and uncertain but genuine. "I believe I may be developing a preference for appalling temperaments." She left him standing in the garden, his eyes following her as she walked back toward the house. She did not look back. But she carried the warmth of that smile with her for the rest of the day, and when Lady Hartwick woke and demanded to know why her companion was grinning like a fool, Rosalind could not think of a single sensible answer. Lady Hartwick kept to her bed for 2 days, during which time Rosalind found herself in the impossible position of being expected to attend house-party events as a guest, while remaining, in every meaningful sense, a servant. The contradiction proved exhausting. She joined the other guests for breakfast each morning, seated at the lower end of the table, where the unmarried ladies' companions and elderly relations clustered together like refugees from better times. She walked in the gardens when walking was prescribed, sat in the drawing room when sitting was expected, and made conversation with anyone willing to speak to a woman of uncertain status and no fortune. Lady Emmeline was not among those willing to speak. Indeed, Lady Emmeline had developed a talent for looking directly through Rosalind as though she were made of glass. When forced by circumstance to acknowledge her existence, a narrow corridor, a request to pass the salt, she did so with a politeness so frigid it could have preserved meat. Rosalind told herself she did not mind. She had survived worse than a beautiful woman's disdain. But it was difficult not to notice that Lady Emmeline's coldness intensified whenever the Duke was present, and it was impossible not to notice that the Duke's attention, despite his best efforts, continued to drift in Rosalind's direction with alarming regularity. "He's watching you again," murmured Mrs. Pemberton, a cheerful widow of modest fortune who had befriended Rosalind over their shared exile at the unfashionable end of the breakfast table. "That's the 3rd time this morning. He is surveying his guests. It is what hosts do. Hosts survey the room. They do not stare at one particular guest with an expression that suggests they are solving a particularly vexing mathematical problem." Mrs. Pemberton buttered her toast with enthusiasm. "What did you do to him?" "I beg your pardon?" "The Duke of Thornfield is famous for noticing nothing except his ledgers and his lists. He has held this house party every year for 6 years, and I have attended the last 4, not as a matrimonial candidate, obviously. I'm far too old and too poor, but I have never once seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you." She took a bite of toast and chewed thoughtfully. "It's quite romantic, actually, in a terrifying sort of way." "There is nothing romantic about it. His Grace and I had a brief conversation about books, that is all." "Was it a good conversation?" Rosalind thought about spelling corrections and lists of potential wives, and a smile that had cracked open something she had believed permanently frozen. "It was unexpected. The best conversations usually are." Mrs. Pemberton's eyes sparkled with vicarious excitement. "Will there be more unexpected conversations, do you think?" "I sincerely hope not." But even as she said it, Rosalind knew she was lying. She had spent 2 days hoping for exactly that, hoping he would appear in the library during her evening reading, hoping he would seek her out during the afternoon walks, hoping for any excuse to hear her name in his voice again. Rosalind. As though the word meant something, as though she meant something. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was the kind of hope that had destroyed her once before, when Edward had spoken of love and forever, and then vanished the moment her fortune did. but she could not seem to stop hoping. On the third day, Lady Hartwick pronounced herself recovered and emerged from her chambers like a butterfly from a chrysalis, if butterflies were elderly, sharp-tongued, and possessed of an uncanny ability to detect romantic intrigue at 50 paces. "You have been avoiding the Duke," she announced over her afternoon tea, fixing Rosalind with a penetrating stare. "I have been attending to my duties." "You have been hiding. Badly, I might add. Every time he enters a room, you find urgent business elsewhere. It is not subtle." "I was not aware subtlety was required." "Subtlety is always required when managing men." Lady Hartwick sipped her tea with the air of a general reviewing battle plans. "Especially men who are attempting to pretend they do not notice your absence while looking for you in every corner of every room." "Your Grace." "Do not your Grace me, child. I am old, not blind. Something happened between you and Thornfield. Something that has my granddaughter spitting like a cat, and the Duke walking about with an expression of profound confusion. I want to know what it is." Rosalind set down her own teacup carefully. She had learned, over 5 years of service, that Lady Hartwick valued honesty over deference. It was one of the reasons she had stayed. "I insulted him," she said, "on my first night here. I stumbled into his private study and found him writing his list, the one everyone talks about, and I laughed at him." "You laughed at the Duke of Thornfield." "I corrected his spelling, and then I criticized his methodology for selecting a wife." Lady Hartwick was silent for a long moment. Then she began to laugh, a genuine, full-bodied laugh that shook her frail frame and brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she gasped when she could speak again. "No wonder he cannot stop staring at you. You probably gave the man his first honest conversation in a decade. It was inappropriate. It was magnificent. Tell me everything." So Rosalind told her about the lists and the spelling error and the crossed-out name, about the conversation in the garden and the way he had said her name, about the terror and the longing and the certainty that she was standing on the edge of something that would destroy her. Lady Hartwick listened without interruption. When Rosalind finished, the old woman was quiet for a long time. "You love him," she said finally. It was not a question. "I barely know him." "You know enough. I have watched you for 3 years, Rosalind. I have seen you endure indignities that would have crushed a lesser woman. I have seen you maintain your dignity, your humor, your spirit, despite everything the world has thrown at you. And I have never not once seen you look at anyone the way you look at that man. It does not matter how I look at him. He is a duke. I am a companion. There is no version of this story that ends well for me. There are many versions of many stories. The question is which one you are willing to fight for." Rosalind shook her head. "I am not in a position to fight for anything. I have no fortune, no connections, no family to speak of except Sarah. If I pursue this, if I allow myself to believe in it, I will lose everything. My position, my reputation, whatever small security I have managed to build. And if you do not pursue it?" The question hung in the air between them. "Then I will be safe," Rosalind said quietly, "and empty. And I will spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." "Yes." Lady Hartwick's voice was gentle now, stripped of its usual tartness. "That is the choice. Safety or possibility, certainty or hope." She reached out and took Rosalind's hand, an unprecedented gesture of affection. "I cannot tell you what to do, child, but I can tell you this. I married my first husband for security. He was kind and dull, and I was never unhappy with him, but I was never truly happy either. I married my second husband for love, against my family's wishes, against society's expectations, against every rule I had been taught to follow. It was terrifying and magnificent, and when he died, I thought I would never recover." She paused, her pale eyes distant with memory. If I had it to do again, knowing everything, knowing the grief that waited at the end, I would choose love every time. Because the years I had with him, the life we built together, the joy and the passion, and the absolute rightness of being with someone who saw me truly, that was worth any amount of pain. But Sebastian the Duke, he has not offered me anything. A few conversations, a few looks. Perhaps I am imagining all of it. Perhaps. Lady Hartwig squeezed her hand. There is one way to find out. Which is? Stop hiding. Stop protecting yourself. Stop waiting for certainty before you allow yourself to hope. The old woman smiled, and for a moment she looked almost young again. Be brave, Rosalind. You have been cautious for 5 years. Perhaps it is time to try something different. That evening, for the first time since Lady Hartwig's illness, Rosalind dressed with care. Her wardrobe was limited 3 serviceable day dresses, 2 evening gowns in colours chosen to avoid attention, but she selected the better of the evening gowns, a deep green silk that brought out the copper in her hair, and spent extra time arranging her curls. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who had once been pretty, and might be again if she stopped trying to disappear. "You look lovely," Lady Hartwig said approvingly when Rosalind came to escort her to dinner. "Like yourself again?" "I look like I'm trying too hard." "You look like a woman who has decided to stop apologizing for existing. There is a difference." The drawing room was crowded when they arrived. The guests gathered in clusters of conversation and intrigue. Rosalind guided Lady Hartwig to her usual settee and was preparing to retreat to her usual corner when the old woman's grip tightened on her arm. "Stay beside me," she commanded. "As my granddaughter appears determined to pretend I do not exist, I require intelligent company." So Rosalind stood beside Lady Hartwig's settee, like an honour guard, and tried not to scan the room for a tall figure with grey eyes. She failed. Sebastian was near the fireplace, deep in conversation with several older gentlemen about what appeared to be agricultural improvements. He was dressed impeccably in dark evening clothes, his severe face animated with genuine interest in the discussion. When he laughed at something Lord Ashton said, Rosalind felt the sound in her chest like a physical touch. As if sensing her attention, he looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, an endless, suspended moment, everything else disappeared. The conversation, the candlelight, the press of other bodies. There was only Sebastian looking at her, as though she were the answer to a question he had spent his whole life asking. Then someone moved between them, breaking the connection, and Rosalind remembered to breathe. "Go to him," Lady Hartwig murmured. "I cannot simply—" "The library. He will find a reason to follow." The old woman's eyes were knowing. "Trust me. I have been observing men for 72 years. That one is looking for any excuse to speak with you alone." Before Rosalind could protest, Lady Emmeline appeared at her grandmother's side in a rustle of silk and expensive perfume. "Grandmother, how delightful that you are feeling better." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Miss Thorne, I believe Lord Ashton's daughter was looking for you. Something about borrowed embroidery silk." The dismissal was unmistakable. Rosalind curtsied and retreated, her face burning with humiliation. But instead of seeking out Lord Ashton's daughter, who had certainly not asked for her, she slipped through a side door and made her way to the library. The great room was empty and dark, lit only by the remnants of a fire in the massive hearth. Rosalind moved through the shadows until she reached the windows overlooking the garden, where the moonlight provided enough illumination to see without candles. She stood there for perhaps 10 minutes, watching the silver light play across the formal hedges, and wondering if Lady Hartwig was right, if Sebastian would find a reason to follow, if she was a fool for hoping. The door opened behind her. She did not turn. She did not need to. She knew his footsteps now, knew the particular weight and rhythm of his approach. "You left the drawing room," Sebastian said. His voice was low in the darkness. "Lady Emmeline did not seem pleased." "Lady Emmeline is rarely pleased with anything I do. She sees you as a threat." He moved closer. Rosalind could feel him now, the warmth of his presence at her back, the way the air itself seemed to shift around him. "She is not wrong. I am not a threat. I am a companion with no fortune and no prospects. You are a woman who makes me forget every careful plan I ever made." His breath stirred the hair at her temple. "You are a woman who walks into my study and laughs at my lists and corrects my spelling and then walks away as though she has not just rearranged my entire understanding of the world." Rosalind closed her eyes. "Sebastian, say it again." "What?" "My name." His hands came to rest on her shoulders, light, questioning, ready to withdraw at any sign of resistance. "No one has called me by my name in years, not since my mother died. I am your Grace and Thornfield and the Duke to everyone, and I had forgotten what it felt like to be simply Sebastian." She turned then, turning within the circle of his arms until she faced him. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and angles, his grey eyes dark with an emotion she could not name. "Sebastian," she said again, and watched something break open in his expression. "Rosalind." His hands rose to cup her face gently, reverently, as though she were something precious. "I have tried to stay away from you. I have reminded myself of duty and propriety and the 100 reasons why this is madness, but I cannot seem to care about any of them when you are near. What about Lady Emmeline? Your lists? The suitable duchess you came here to find? The lists are meaningless. They have always been meaningless, a way to avoid feeling anything real, to keep the world at arm's length where it could not hurt me." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "Lady Emmeline is beautiful and accomplished, and would make an entirely appropriate duchess. But when I try to imagine a life with her, decades of polite conversation and careful distance and smiles that never reach her eyes, I feel nothing. And when I imagine a life without you—" He stopped, his voice catching. "When I imagine a life without you," he continued, "I feel everything. Terror, loss, a kind of hollowness. I do not know how to survive. You have known me for less than a week. I have known you for 4 days, 11 hours, and approximately 37 minutes. I have counted every one of them." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I have lists, remember? I keep track of things." Despite everything, despite the impossibility of the situation and the fear that coiled in her stomach, Rosalind laughed. "That is either very romantic or very alarming. I cannot decide which. It is possibly both." His hands slid from her face to her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Rosalind, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Yes?" "Is there any part of you, any part at all, that returns what I feel? Or am I alone in this madness?" The question hung between them like a held breath. Rosalind could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath his evening coat, could see the vulnerability in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide. This man, this powerful, wealthy, carefully controlled man, was laying himself bare before her. The last time she had trusted someone with her heart, he had destroyed it. But Sebastian was not Edward. Edward had spoken of love while calculating her worth. Sebastian had calculated worth for years, and now stood trembling because he had found something his lists could not quantify. "I am not alone," she said quietly. "You are not alone." The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. I feel it too. All of it. The terror and the impossibility and the sense that something is happening that cannot be stopped or controlled or made sensible." She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heartbeat. "I have spent 5 years trying to want nothing, because wanting things leads only to disappointment. And then you added my name to your list, and I have wanted something ever since. What do you want?" "I do not know. That is what terrifies me." She looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "I only know that when I imagine returning to my life as it was invisible, careful, safe, I feel something closer to grief than relief." Sebastian's arms came around her then, pulling her close in an embrace that was as much comfort as passion. She rested her head against his shoulder and felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. "We cannot stay here," he murmured against her hair. "Someone will come looking, but I could not let another day pass without telling you. I know." She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "I know. But what happens now? You are expected to offer for Lady Emmeline. Your aunt, your guests, society itself, everyone expects it." "I do not care about expectations." "You should. You are a duke. You have responsibilities, tenants, villages, an estate that depends on you. Lady Emmeline's dowry would fund improvements that could change hundreds of lives." His jaw tightened. "You have been listening to gossip." "I have been paying attention. The same attention you would pay if you were thinking clearly instead of—" She stopped herself. "Instead of what? Falling in love with you?" The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. "Do not say that." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do not say things you cannot mean." "I mean every word." His hands tightened on her arms. "I have never meant anything more in my life. I love you, Roselin Thorne. I love your sharp tongue and your sharper mind. I love the way you refuse to cower before anyone, even when prudence would recommend it. I love that you corrected my spelling and criticized my methodology and made me laugh when I had forgotten how. I love you, and I do not care if it is too soon or too sudden or too impossible. Sebastian, tell me you do not feel the same. Look me in the eyes and tell me this is one-sided, that I have imagined the way you look at me, and I will let you go. I will marry Lady Emmeline and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." She should do it. She should lie to him to protect them both, to preserve whatever chance she had at a stable future, to prevent the scandal that would surely follow if a duke threw over the suitable candidate for a penniless companion. She opened her mouth to speak the necessary words. "I love you too," she heard herself say instead. "God help me. I love you too." They met in secret over the following days, stolen moments in the library, brief conversations in the garden, glances across crowded rooms that said everything words could not. It was agony and ecstasy in equal measure, the sweetness of connection poisoned by the knowledge that it could not last. Lady Emmeline grew more hostile with each passing day. She no longer bothered with the pretense of politeness. Her comments to Rosalind dripped with acid, her smiles sharp as knives. When Sebastian was present, she performed adoration with theatrical intensity. When he was absent, she made certain Rosalind understood exactly how unwelcome she was. "The Duke has asked me to walk with him this afternoon," Lady Emmeline announced over breakfast one morning, her voice pitched to carry across the room. "Just the two of us. He says he has something particular to discuss." Rosalind kept her face neutral, but her heart clenched painfully. Something particular. It was the phrase every marriage-minded mamma waited to hear. The Duke had something particular to discuss with the most suitable candidate for his Duchess. She had known this was coming. She had always known. "How delightful for you," Mrs. Pemberton murmured beside her, "though I notice you do not look particularly delighted, Miss Thorne." "I am happy for Lady Emmeline. She has worked very hard for this." "Has she? It seems to me the Duke has been working rather harder to avoid her than to pursue her. But what would I know?" Mrs. Pemberton patted her hand sympathetically. I am merely a cheerful widow with nothing better to do than observe everyone else's romantic entanglements. The morning passed in a blur of anxious speculation. Rosalind performed her duties mechanically, reading aloud to Lady Hartwick, sorting correspondence, arranging medicine doses while her mind circled endlessly around the same terrible questions. Had Sebastian decided to do his duty? Had their impossible connection been merely a temporary madness, now past? Had she been a fool to believe that a duke might actually choose love over logic? At 2 o'clock, she watched from an upper window as Sebastian and Lady Emmeline set out across the garden toward the ornamental lake. Lady Emmeline's hand rested on his arm. Her face was radiant with anticipation. Rosalind turned away from the window, sick with jealousy she had no right to feel. "Stop that," Lady Hartwick said from her chair by the fire. "Whatever you are imagining, it is not happening." "I am not imagining anything. You are imagining him proposing to my granddaughter, and you are making yourself ill with it." The old woman set down her book. "Come here." Rosalind approached reluctantly. Lady Hartwick studied her face for a long moment. "Do you trust him?" Not his position or his title or his reputation. Him, Sebastian Ashworth, the man you claim to love. Do you trust him? It was the question Rosalind had been avoiding. Trust was dangerous. Trust was what had destroyed her before. She had trusted Edward's pretty words, trusted his promises of forever, and look where that had led. But Sebastian was not Edward. Sebastian had looked at her with vulnerability in his eyes and said, "I love you," as though the words cost him everything. Sebastian had counted the hours since their first meeting and remembered every moment. Sebastian had touched her face like she was precious. "Yes," she said quietly. "God help me. I trust him." "Then trust him now. Whatever is happening on that walk, it is not what my granddaughter believes." The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Rosalind tried to read and could not focus. She tried to write letters to Sarah and found she could not form coherent sentences. She tried to simply sit in the drawing room like a normal guest, but every time someone entered, her heart leaped with hope and then crashed with disappointment. It was nearly dark when Sebastian finally appeared. He came to the drawing room where the guests had gathered before dinner, his face carefully blank. Lady Emmeline was not with him. "Where is my granddaughter?" Lady Hartwick demanded. "Lady Emmeline has retired to her chambers with a headache," Sebastian said. His voice was formal, controlled, revealing nothing. She asked that her apologies be conveyed. A murmur ran through the assembled guests. A headache, the universal code for distress, too great to face in public. Sebastian's eyes found Rosalind across the room. Something in his expression, a tightness around the mouth, a plea in the grey depths, made her breath catch. "Miss Thorne," his voice carried clearly. "A word, if you please. Lady Hartwick, I hope you do not object to borrowing your companion for a few moments." "I object to very little that involves my companion's welfare." Lady Hartwick's tone was dry. "Take as many moments as you require." The whispers intensified as Rosalind crossed the room to meet him. She was painfully aware of every eye upon her, the curiosity, the speculation, the dawning scandal of a duke singling out a companion for private conversation. Sebastian led her through the corridors in silence, not to the library, but to a small parlour she had not seen before. It was clearly a private space, feminine, probably belonging to a previous duchess, and completely empty. He closed the door behind them and leaned against it, his composure finally cracking. "I did not offer for her," he said. "I could not." Relief flooded through her, so intense she had to grip the back of a chair for support. "Sebastian." She assumed I had invited her to walk so I could propose. She was already planning the wedding breakfast when I told her. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I told her that I hold her in the highest esteem, but that my affections are engaged elsewhere. You told her there was someone else? I told her the truth, that I had met someone who had changed everything. Someone who made me question every assumption I had ever held about what I wanted from life. His eyes met hers. I did not mention your name, but she knew. She has known for days. She will tell everyone. Probably. Her mother certainly will. He pushed away from the door and moved toward her. I do not care, Rosalind. Let them talk. Let them speculate. The truth will emerge eventually, and I would rather face it openly than spend another moment pretending I feel anything for Lady Emmeline except polite indifference. Your aunt will be furious. Society will talk. Your reputation. My reputation has survived worse. He took her hands in his warm, strong, steady. I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, being the responsible son, the dutiful heir, the appropriate duke. I have made decisions based on logic and practicality and the good of the estate, and I have been miserable, deeply, profoundly, endlessly miserable. You never showed it. I never allowed myself to feel it. Feeling things was dangerous. Feeling things meant caring about things, and caring about things meant risking loss. His grip tightened on her hands. Then you walked into my study and laughed at my lists, and suddenly the armor I had spent years building felt like a prison instead of protection. I do not want you to regret this. If you choose me over duty, over the dowry that could help your tenants, there will be other solutions. There are always other solutions. I am a wealthy man, Rosalind, even without Lady Emmeline's fortune. My tenants will not suffer because I chose to marry for love instead of advantage. Marry. The word hung in the air between them. Sebastian. Her voice shook. You cannot possibly be saying, I am saying exactly what you think I am saying. He released her hands and dropped to one knee on the parlor carpet. I am doing this badly, I know. There should be flowers and moonlight and your family's blessing, but I cannot wait another moment. I cannot spend another night knowing that you might slip away from me. You don't have to. Rosalind Thorne. He looked up at her, and his eyes, those cold grey eyes that had seemed so forbidding on that first night, were blazing with an emotion that stole her breath. I have been compiling lists my entire life in an attempt to make the world orderly and safe. But you have taught me that the best things in life cannot be quantified or ranked or reduced to columns of advantages and disadvantages. You are the best thing in my life. Will you marry me? She should be sensible. She should ask for time to think, time to consider the implications, time to prepare for the scandal that would surely follow. Yes, she said instead. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He rose and pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her for the first time, the first of what she hoped would be thousands, she felt the last of her walls crumble to dust. The scandal, when it broke, was everything she had feared and nothing she had expected. Lady Emmeline's mother descended on Thornfield Abbey like an avenging fury, demanding explanations and threatening social ruin. Sebastian met her with icy calm, acknowledging that he had offered for Miss Thorne and intended to marry her regardless of anyone's objections. "A companion!" Lady Fairchild shrieked. "You are throwing over my daughter for a servant!" "Miss Thorne is the daughter of Viscount Ashbury," Sebastian said. "Her circumstances are reduced through no fault of her own, but her breeding is impeccable. Her father was a gambler and a wastrel. Her father's sins are not her own, and I would marry her if she were the daughter of a coal miner, so I suggest you save your breath." Lady Fairchild left that afternoon, taking Lady Emmeline with her. Lady Hartwick remained. "I am too old to be dragged about the countryside in a temper," she announced when Rosalind came to her chambers, uncertain of her welcome. "Besides, I find I quite like the idea of my companion becoming a duchess. It will irritate Emmeline's mother for years. My lady. Oh, stop! Lady Hartwick waved a hand. You never belonged in service, child. You were born for better things, and through some miracle, better things have found you. I will not pretend I am not losing an excellent companion, but I am gaining an excellent friend. She paused. You will visit me when you are a Grand Duchess with more important things to do than entertain an old woman? I will visit you every week, Roselin promised, tears pricking her eyes. Every day, if you wish it. Once a week will suffice. I value my solitude. But Lady Hartwick's voice was thick with emotion. Now go. Your Duke is waiting for you in the garden, looking like a lost puppy. Put him out of his misery. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements and complications. Sebastian's aunt arrived, primed for battle, and was promptly outmaneuvered by Lady Hartwick, who proved to be a formidable ally. Letters flew back and forth to London, to solicitors, to clergy, to the few members of Roselin's family who still acknowledged her existence. And through it all, Sebastian was at her side, steady, certain, occasionally overwhelmed by the chaos he had unleashed, but never for a moment regretting it. I received a letter from Sarah today, Roselin told him one evening as they walked in the garden. The house party had officially ended, but she had remained at Thornfield as Lady Hartwick's guest, a fiction that allowed her to stay near Sebastian without entirely abandoning propriety. Your sister? How is she? She is recovering well. The physician you sent was excellent. Roselin squeezed his arm. You did not have to do that. Of course I did. Sarah is your family, which makes her my family now. He covered her hand with his. I have been thinking about that, actually. About family. Oh? I have been alone for a long time. My parents died when I was 23. My brother with them. I had no wife, no children, no one who truly depended on me except servants and tenants. His voice was thoughtful, almost wondering. I told myself I preferred it that way. That solitude was safer than connection. But then you came along, with your sister, and your loyalty, and your absolute refusal to be impressed by my title, and I realized I had been living a half-life. Sebastian. I want Sarah to live with us after we are married, if she is willing. I want her to have a season, a dowry, every opportunity that was stolen from her. I want... He stopped walking, turning to face her. I want a real family, Rosalind. I want children and chaos and laughter in the halls of Thornfield. I want everything I spent years convincing myself I did not need. Her eyes filled with tears. You would do that? For Sarah? For you? For us? For the life I finally understand I want? He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Is that acceptable? It is more than acceptable. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his lips. It is everything I never dared to hope for. But happiness, Roselin knew, was never unearned. The letter arrived 3 days later, brought by a messenger who rode through the night from London. Rosalind was in the library when Sebastian found her, his face grave. It's Sarah, he said. She's taken a turn. The physician says... He did not need to finish. Rosalind was already moving, already calculating what needed to be done. I must go to her, immediately. I cannot... We will go together. His voice was calm, but his eyes were worried. I have already ordered the carriage. We can be in London by morning if we drive through the night. Sebastian, you do not have to... She is my family now. He took her hands, steadying her. I meant what I said. Whatever happens, we face it together. The carriage ride was endless. Rosalind sat rigid with fear, counting the miles, praying to a god she had long since stopped believing in. Sebastian held her hand in silence, offering comfort with his presence rather than empty words. They arrived at dawn. The lodging house was quiet when they entered, too quiet. Rosalin's heart was in her throat as she climbed the stairs to Sarah's room, Sebastian close behind her. But when she pushed open the door, Sarah was sitting up in bed, pale but alert, a bowl of broth in her hands. "Ros!" Her sister's face lit up with surprise and delight. "What are you? The physician said you were not to be disturbed, that I was out of danger. We received word you had taken a turn." Rosalind flew to the bedside, gathering Sarah in her arms. I thought, the fever broke yesterday. I am much better, truly." Sarah pulled back, studying her sister's face. "You look terrible. Have you slept at all?" "Not for approximately 36 hours, Sebastian said from the doorway. Sarah's eyes went wide. She looked from the Duke of Thornfield, dishevelled, exhausted, standing in the doorway of a shabby lodging house, as though he belonged there, to her sister, and understanding dawned on her face. "You're the Duke," she said, "the one Rosalind wrote about, the one with the lists." "Guilty on all counts." Sebastian moved into the room, folding his tall frame into a rickety chair as though it were a throne. "You must be Sarah. Your sister has told me a great deal about you." "She has told me nothing about you, only that you were hosting a house party and that Lady Emmeline was meant to be your Duchess." Sarah's eyes narrowed with protective suspicion. "Why are you here? Why is Rosalind travelling with you in the middle of the night?" "Because your sister has agreed to marry me," Sebastian said calmly, "and because you are her family, which makes you my family, and I do not abandon family." Sarah stared at him, then at Rosalind, then back at him. "Marry," she repeated. "You, a duke, are marrying my sister." The companion. The former companion, though technically she never resigned. Sebastian smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "We have been somewhat distracted by other matters." "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that I need you to explain everything from the beginning." So they did. Sitting in that cramped room in the early morning light, the three of them together, weaving the story of how Rosalind had stumbled into a duke's private study and changed both their lives forever. Sarah listened with growing amazement, asking questions, demanding details, occasionally laughing at the more absurd moments. By the time they finished, Sarah was grinning. "He corrected your spelling," she said to Sebastian, "and you fell in love with her, among other things. And you're going to let me live at Thornfield? Have a season?" "All of it. If you wish it. You are welcome regardless." Sarah looked at Rosalind, and her eyes were bright with tears. "You found someone," she whispered. "After everything. After Father and Edward, and all those years of being invisible. You found someone who sees you." "I did." Rosalind reached for Sebastian's hand. "I found him. Or perhaps he found me. It's difficult to say who stumbled into whose study first." "I believe it was technically my study," Sebastian said, "though I am willing to concede the point in exchange for never having to hear about the spelling error again." "You will be hearing about that spelling error for the rest of your life," Rosalind informed him. "I intend to mention it at every opportunity." "I was afraid of that." But he was smiling, and when he lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes were soft with adoration. "I suppose I shall have to endure it." They remained in London for a week, until Sarah was strong enough to travel. Then they returned to Thornfield together, all three of them, and began the work of building a new life. But even as the days grew warmer and the wedding date approached, Rosalind could not entirely shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lady Emmeline's departure had been too quiet. Lady Fairchild's threats too vague. The scandal had erupted and then subsided with suspicious speed. "You are worrying again," Sebastian said one evening, finding her in the library with a book she had not been reading. "I can always tell. You get a particular crease between your eyebrows. I do not have a crease. You have a very fetching crease. It appears whenever you are overthinking something. He sat beside her on the settee, drawing her against his side. Tell me. It's nothing. Probably nothing. Tell me anyway. She sighed. Lady Emmeline, Lady Fairchild. They left so easily. They threatened scandal and ruin, and then they simply left. It does not feel finished. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. You think they are planning something? I think Lady Fairchild is not the kind of woman who accepts defeat gracefully, and I think Lady Emmeline blames me for losing her chance at a duchy. She looked up at him. I may be imagining things, but I cannot shake the feeling that we have not heard the last of them. Then we will be prepared. His arm tightened around her. Whatever comes, whatever they attempt, we will face it together. I will not allow anyone to hurt you. Rosalind, not Lady Emmeline, not society, not anyone. You cannot protect me from gossip. I can try. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Besides, you are marrying a duke. A certain amount of protection comes with the title. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love was enough, that their connection could weather any storm, that the future held only happiness. But she had been disappointed before. She had trusted before. And the scar tissue around her heart whispered warnings she could not quite ignore. I love you, she said quietly. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. I know. His voice was tender. And I love you. Whatever happens. Always. They sat together in the library as the fire burned low, holding on to each other against the uncertainties of the future. The wedding was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until she would become the Duchess of Thornfield. 3 weeks until her transformation from invisible companion to one of the most prominent women in England would be complete. 3 weeks. Rosalind closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that everything would be all right. The letter arrived the day before they were to leave for London to purchase her wedding clothes. It was addressed to Sebastian, marked urgent, sealed with the crest of a prestigious London solicitor. Rosalind watched him open it at the breakfast table, watched his face drain of colour as he read. Sebastian? Her voice was sharp with fear. What is it? He looked up at her, and his expression, the careful blankness, the tightness around his mouth, told her everything she needed to know. Lady Fairchild, he said, she has filed a breach of promise suit against me on Emmeline's behalf. The room seemed to tilt. She claims I gave Lady Emmeline reason to expect an offer of marriage, that my attentions at 3 consecutive house parties constituted an implied promise, that my subsequent engagement to you represents a betrayal of that promise. That's absurd. You never proposed to her. You never even... It does not matter what I did or did not say. In matters of reputation, implication is often enough. Sebastian set the letter down, and his hands were trembling. If this goes to court, the scandal will be enormous. Every detail of our courtship will be examined and criticized. Your past will be dragged through the newspapers. Sarah's illness, your father's debts, your years of service, all of it will become public knowledge. I don't care about my reputation. You should. You will be a duchess. Your reputation affects not just you, but everyone connected to us, Sarah, our future children, even the servants and tenants who depend on the Thornfield name. Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying... I am saying nothing. Sebastian rose from the table and came to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. I am telling you what we face. I am not saying I will bow to it. But the scandal will be survived, as scandals always are. His grey eyes met hers, fierce with determination. "I did not fight my way to you, only to surrender at the first obstacle. Lady Fairchild can file whatever suits she wishes. I will not give you up. Sebastian, listen to me." His grip tightened on her hands. "I spent 32 years avoiding feeling anything. I built walls and made lists and convinced myself that logic and duty were enough. Then you walked into my study and demolished everything I thought I knew, and I cannot go back to that half-life. Not for Lady Fairchild, not for society, not for anyone." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I don't want to ruin you. You have saved me." He released her hands and cupped her face, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That was the promise I made, and I intend to keep it." She pulled him close, burying her face against his shoulder, letting his warmth anchor her against the storm she could feel gathering on the horizon. The wedding was in 3 weeks. The lawsuit was filed, and somewhere in London, Lady Fairchild was sharpening her knives, preparing to destroy the happiness Rosalind had only just begun to believe she deserved. The solicitors' offices in Lincoln's Inn Fields smelled of old paper and older money. Rosalind sat in a leather chair that had probably witnessed a century of legal negotiations, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, while Sebastian paced before the window like a caged lion. "The suit has no merit," Mr. Hartley was saying, his spectacles glinting in the grey London light. "Lady Fairchild's claims rest entirely on implication and interpretation. His Grace never made any promise, verbal or written, to Lady Emmeline. 3 house-party invitations do not constitute a betrothal." "Then why are we here?" Sebastian stopped pacing. "If the suit has no merit, we should be able to have it dismissed immediately. Because merit and outcome are not always aligned in matters of this nature, Your Grace." Mr. Hartley's voice was patient, practiced. "Lady Fairchild is not seeking to win in court. She is seeking to inflict maximum damage through the proceedings themselves. Every witness called, every piece of evidence examined, every day the trial continues, all of it becomes fodder for the newspapers. By the time a verdict is reached, the reputations involved will have been thoroughly savaged, regardless of the outcome." Rosalind felt her stomach clench. "She means to destroy us through exposure." "Precisely, Miss Thorne. Lady Fairchild is a formidable woman with considerable social connections. She has made it known throughout the ton that she considers this suit a matter of family honour. Whether she wins or loses, she intends to ensure that your marriage begins under a cloud of scandal so dark it may never fully lift." Sebastian slammed his palm against the windowsill. "This is extortion." "It is society, Your Grace, which often amounts to the same thing." Mr. Hartley removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. "There is, of course, another option." "Which is?" "Settlement. Lady Fairchild has indicated through intermediaries that she would be willing to withdraw the suit in exchange for certain considerations." "What kind of considerations?" Mr. Hartley's expression became carefully neutral. "She wants you to end your engagement to Miss Thorne, publicly, with an announcement citing your recognition that your attentions to Lady Emmeline created expectations you are honour-bound to fulfil." The silence that followed was absolute. Rosalind could not breathe, could not think, could only stare at the pattern in the carpet, while her carefully constructed hope crumbled around her like a sandcastle meeting the tide. This was it, then. The moment she had been dreading since Lady Emmeline first looked at her with hatred. The moment when reality would reassert itself and remind her that companions did not marry dukes, that love did not conquer practicality, that happy endings were for other women, women with fortunes and family connections and unstained reputations. She should make it easy for him. She should stand and say that she understood, that she released him from his promise, that she had always known this was too good to be true. She should spare him the guilt of having to choose between duty and desire. No. Sebastian's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts like a blade. Your Grace. I said no. He turned from the window, and his face was terrible in its fury. Not at her, she realized, but at the impossible situation, at the system that would punish them for daring to love outside their prescribed roles. I will not abandon Rosalind. I will not pretend affection for Lady Emmeline that I have never felt. I will not allow Lady Fairchild to dictate my choices through threats and manipulation. The scandal. Let there be scandal. Sebastian moved to stand beside Rosalind's chair, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder with fierce possessiveness. Let the newspapers write whatever they wish. Let society whisper and speculate and condemn. I would rather be notorious and happy than respectable and empty. Mr. Hartley sighed. I admire your conviction, Your Grace, but I must advise you of the practical consequences. If this goes to trial, Miss Thorne's past will be examined in excruciating detail. Her father's debts, her years of service, every position she has held, and every employer she has worked for. The opposition will seek to portray her as a fortune hunter who deliberately ensnared a duke above her station. That is a lie. Truth is irrelevant in the court of public opinion. What matters is the story that can be told. The solicitor's voice was not unkind. Miss Thorne, I must ask you directly. Are you prepared to endure that level of scrutiny? To have your private life dissected in newspapers? To know that every drawing room in London is discussing your most painful memories? Rosalind looked up at Sebastian. His grey eyes met hers, and in them she saw everything: love, fear, determination, and a desperate hope that she would be brave enough to weather this storm beside him. 5 years ago she would have run. 5 years ago she would have protected herself the only way she knew how, by retreating, by becoming invisible, by choosing safety over possibility. But she was not that woman anymore. Sebastian had taught her that she was worth fighting for. Lady Hartwick had taught her that love was worth any amount of pain. And she had taught herself, over 5 years of surviving the unsurvivable, that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Yes, she said quietly. I am prepared. Sebastian's hand tightened on her shoulder. Something in his expression, relief, pride, overwhelming love, made her chest ache with emotion. Then we proceed to trial, Mr. Hartley said. I will begin preparing our defence immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you return to Thornfield and avoid any public appearances that might provide additional ammunition to the opposition. We cannot hide forever. Not forever. Just until we have a strategy in place. The solicitor rose, signalling the end of the meeting. I will send word as soon as I have substantive developments. Until then, stay quiet, stay together, and try, if possible, not to give Lady Fairchild any more reasons to hate you than she already has. The carriage ride back to Thornfield was silent. Rosalind stared out the window at the passing countryside, her mind churning with fears she could not voice. Beside her, Sebastian sat with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, radiating a fury that seemed to heat the air around him. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence. You should marry immediately. They both turned to look at her. She had insisted on accompanying them to London, despite her still fragile health, and had sat in the solicitor's waiting room while they received the news. I beg your pardon, Sebastian said. Marry immediately, before the trial, before Lady Fairchild can do anything more to interfere. Sarah's pale face was determined. Once Rosalind is your Duchess, she has the protection of your title and your fortune. The newspapers can say what they like, but no one can touch her legally, and a married couple presents a very different picture than an engaged one. The wedding is still 3 weeks away. The banns must be read, special license. Sarah waved a hand dismissively. You're a duke. Surely you can obtain a special license within a day or two." Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile Rosalind had seen from him since the letter arrived. "Your sister," he said to Rosalind, "is rather brilliant." "She has her moments." "I am right here," Sarah said, "and I am always brilliant. It simply takes people time to notice." Sebastian reached across the carriage to take Rosalind's hand. "What do you think? Can you forgive me for a hasty wedding? No grand celebration, no society in attendance, just us and whoever we can gather on short notice." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were tears of a different kind. "I never wanted a grand wedding. I wanted you. I still want you, whatever form that takes." "Then we marry tomorrow." His voice was fierce. "As soon as I can obtain the license. Lady Fairchild wants to stop us. She will find that she has merely hastened the very thing she sought to prevent." "What about Lady Hartwick?" Sarah asked. "She'll be furious if she misses the wedding." "Then we'll bring her with us." Sebastian was already calculating, his mind working through logistics with the same precision he once applied to his lists. "We return to Thornfield, gather what we need, and leave for London at dawn. I'll obtain the license while you prepare. We can be married by tomorrow afternoon." "That is rather fast," Rosalind said weakly. "I have waited 32 years to feel anything real. I will not wait another moment longer than necessary." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Unless you wish to wait. Unless you need more time." She thought about time. About the 5 years she had already wasted being careful, being invisible, being afraid. About the weeks she had spent at Thornfield, falling in love with a man she had thought impossible to love. About the lifetime stretching ahead of them, full of uncertainty and challenge, and the absolute certainty that she wanted to face it all at his side. "No," she said, "I do not wish to wait." The wedding took place in a small chapel near Mayfair, with grey afternoon light filtering through ancient stained glass windows and the smell of beeswax candles heavy in the air. Lady Hartwick had made the journey despite her protests about the state of the roads. She sat in the front pew, dressed in her finest black silk, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and pretending she was not crying. Sarah sat beside her, pale but radiant, her health improving daily under the care of Sebastian's physician. Mrs. Pemberton had somehow learned of the wedding and arrived unannounced, cheerfully explaining that she had been in London anyway and simply couldn't miss the scandal of the season. Sebastian's aunt was conspicuously absent, having sent a stiff note indicating that she could not in good conscience witness such an ill-advised union. "Her loss," Sebastian had said, crumpling the note and tossing it into the fire. "I never liked her anyway." The ceremony itself was brief, the standard words, spoken with trembling voices and steady hands. When Sebastian slipped the ring onto Rosalind's finger, a family heirloom, a circle of diamonds and sapphires that had graced the hands of Duchesses of Thornfield for 300 years, she felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was married. She was a duchess. She was, for the first time in 5 years, home. "I love you," Sebastian murmured as the clergyman concluded the service. "I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." "You have nothing to prove." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his lips, scandalizing the clergyman and making Lady Hartwick's tears flow faster. "You have already given me everything." The wedding breakfast was held at Sebastian's London townhouse, a modest affair by ducal standards, but more lavish than anything Rosalind had experienced in years. They ate and drank and laughed, and for a few precious hours, the lawsuit and Lady Fairchild and the looming scandal faded into irrelevance. It was late afternoon when Mr. Hartley arrived, his face grave. Sebastian met him in the study, with Rosalind at his side. They were married now, whatever came, they would face it together. "Your Grace," Your Grace. The solicitor bowed to each of them in turn. I apologize for intruding on your wedding day, but there has been a development. What kind of development? Lady Emmeline has withdrawn her support from the suit. Rosalind felt the breath leave her lungs. What? She arrived at my offices this morning without her mother's knowledge. She informed me that she has no desire to pursue this matter further, that her mother's actions do not represent her wishes, that she... Mr. Hartley paused, consulting a document. I am quoting directly now. That she wishes the Duke and his Duchess every happiness and deeply regrets the pain her family has caused. Sebastian was very still. Lady Emmeline said this? In my presence, witnessed and documented. She has signed an affidavit to that effect and authorized me to share it with her Grace. He passed a paper to Rosalind. She asked me to give you this personally. Rosalind took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, perfectly formed, and the words it contained were nothing she had expected. Miss Thorne, or rather, Your Grace, as I understand you are now styled, I write this without my mother's knowledge, and she will be furious when she discovers what I have done. But I find I cannot allow her revenge to proceed in my name. You were right about me. I was shallow, cruel, and so certain of my own superiority that I could not see past my prejudices. I believed that my beauty and breeding entitled me to anything I wanted, and when I did not get what I wanted, I blamed everyone except myself. The Duke was never mine to lose. He was polite to me because he is a gentleman, but he never looked at me the way he looks at you. I was too proud to see it, but I see it now. My mother's suit is not about justice or honor. It is about punishing you for being chosen when I was not. It is petty and vindictive, and I am ashamed to have allowed it to proceed this far. I am withdrawing my support. Without my testimony, my mother's claims are baseless. The suit will collapse. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have not earned it. But I ask that you believe me when I say I wish you well. You have something I never understood, how to value real love, freely given. Do not let my mother take that from you. Lady Emmeline Hartwick. Rosalind read the letter twice, then looked up at Sebastian. His face was unreadable. Without Lady Emmeline's testimony, Mr. Hartley said, Lady Fairchild's suit cannot proceed. I expect she will withdraw it within the week, rather than face the humiliation of having her own daughter testify against her. It's over? Rosalind's voice cracked. Just like that? Just like that, Your Grace. Mr. Hartley smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. May I be the first to wish you a scandal-free marriage? I suspect you will find it rather boring after all this excitement. Sebastian laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and relieved. We will endeavour to manage, Mr. Hartley. Thank you. For everything. When the solicitor had gone, Sebastian pulled Rosalind into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. It's over, he said against her hair. We won. We're married, and we won, and nothing can separate us now. I cannot believe Lady Emmeline. Neither can I. But I am grateful. Whatever prompted her change of heart, I am grateful. Rosalind thought about Lady Emmeline's letter, about a woman raised to believe her worth lay in her beauty and connections, suddenly confronting the emptiness of that belief, about pride giving way to something harder and more valuable, honesty, humility, the beginning of real growth. I think, she said slowly, that she may turn out to be a better person than any of us expected, given time. Perhaps. Sebastian pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. But right now, I do not want to think about Lady Emmeline. I want to think about you, about us, about the fact that we are married, and the evening is approaching, and I have been waiting what feels like an eternity to be alone with my wife. Heat flooded Rosalind's cheeks. Sebastian. Say it again. Sebastian. I will never tire of hearing my name in your voice." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "I love you, Rosalind Ashworth, Duchess of Thornfield. I love you, and I intend to spend the rest of the evening demonstrating exactly how much." He swept her into his arms, literally swept her off her feet, and carried her toward the stairs, while she laughed and protested and clung to his shoulders. "Sebastian, put me down. Someone will see. Let them. Let the whole world see. I am carrying my wife to our chambers, and I do not care who knows it." The servants they passed studiously examined the ceiling, the walls, anything other than the Duke and his new Duchess ascending the staircase in a manner that was decidedly undignified and absolutely, perfectly, radiantly happy. 7 years later, Thornfield Abbey had been transformed. Rosalind stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, watching her children play on the lawn below. William, the eldest at 6, was attempting to teach his sister Catherine the finer points of cricket, a lesson that was going poorly, as Catherine was far more interested in chasing butterflies than in hitting balls. And in the nursery behind her, she could hear the faint wails of baby Elizabeth, announcing her displeasure at being kept indoors on such a beautiful day. "She has your temperament," Sebastian said, appearing at her side with a tea tray. "Absolutely appalling." "She has your stubbornness. There is a difference." "There really isn't." He set down the tray and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "How are you feeling?" Rosalind pressed a hand to the swell of her belly, their 4th child, due in another 3 months. "Like a ship at full sail. Uncomfortable, ungainly, and desperately in need of dry dock." "You are beautiful." "I am enormous." "You are beautifully enormous. It is one of your most attractive qualities." She laughed despite herself, leaning back into his warmth. 7 years, and he could still make her laugh. 7 years, and she still felt a flutter of joy every time he walked into a room. 7 years, and she loved him more than she had ever imagined possible, more than she had known she was capable of loving anyone. The scandal had faded, as scandals always did. Lady Fairchild had withdrawn her suit and retreated to the country, her social standing diminished, but not destroyed. Lady Emmeline had married a viscount 2 years later, a love match, surprisingly, to a man who seemed to genuinely appreciate her beyond her beauty. They exchanged letters occasionally, polite and distant, but genuine. Lady Hartwick had died 3 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep. She had left Rosalind a legacy of £500 and a letter that Rosalind kept in her jewellery box, worn soft from repeated reading. "You were never a companion," the letter said. "You were a friend. The best I ever had. Be happy, child. You have earned it." Sarah lived with them at Thornfield, a beloved aunt to the children and a permanent fixture in the household. She had turned down 3 proposals of marriage, declaring that she was perfectly content as she was and had no desire to manage a husband on top of everything else. She ran the household with quiet efficiency, organized the village charity work, and had developed an unexpected friendship with the local vicar that Rosalind suspected might eventually develop into something more. "What are you thinking about?" Sebastian asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything. Nothing." She turned in his arms to face him. "I was thinking about how different my life might have been. If I had not wandered into your study that night, if I had apologized and retreated like a proper companion should, then I would have married Lady Emmeline. We would have been perfectly miserable together, and I would have spent the rest of my life wondering why I felt so empty. And I would have remained invisible, managing other women's households, swallowing my opinions, fading into the background of other people's lives. Instead, you are a duchess, the mother of my children, the light of my existence." Sebastian's grey eyes, warmer now, softer, though still capable of that devastating intensity, searched her face. "Any regrets?" "Not one." She reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the familiar rasp of stubble under her palm. You? Only that I waited so long to meet you. That I spent so many years hiding behind lists and calculations when I could have been looking for someone who would laugh at my spelling and challenge my assumptions and make me feel alive for the first time in my adult life. You were waiting for me. You simply did not know it yet. I suppose I was. He smiled that real smile, the one that still had the power to steal her breath. I have always been fond of lists. Perhaps I simply needed to add the right name to the right one. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Sebastian found Rosalind in his study, their study, now, as she had claimed half the desk for her own correspondence and household management. "You are working too hard," he said. "The physician said you should rest." The physician is not responsible for organizing a harvest festival for 300 people. Rest is a luxury. Rest is a necessity, particularly for a woman in your condition. He plucked the pen from her hand and set it aside. The harvest festival will survive without your attention for one evening. Sebastian, the household accounts will wait, the tenant reports will wait, everything will wait. He pulled her gently to her feet. "Come with me." "Where?" "To bed." "Where else?" "It is barely 9 o'clock." "I am aware of the time. I am also aware that my wife has been on her feet since dawn, that she is carrying our 4th child, and that she has a disturbing tendency to work herself into exhaustion unless someone intervenes." He steered her toward the door. "Consider this an intervention. You are very managing. I am very much in love with a stubborn woman who does not know when to stop. It is a constant challenge." She let him lead her through the corridors and up the stairs, past the portraits of long-dead Ashworths and the tapestries that had hung there for centuries. The house had changed since she first arrived, brighter now, warmer, filled with the evidence of children and life and love. Their chambers had been redecorated according to her taste, the heavy masculine furnishings replaced with lighter pieces that made the space feel welcoming rather than imposing. A fire burned in the grate despite the mild weather, and the bed had been turned down by the servants. "I am not tired," Rosalind said as Sebastian helped her out of her gown. "Liar. I am not that tired. Marginally better." He pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder. "Get into bed. I will join you shortly." She climbed between the sheets, which had been warmed with a bedpan, and watched as her husband moved about the room, banking the fire, closing the curtains, performing the small rituals of domesticity that had become as natural to them as breathing. 7 years. 3 children, with a 4th on the way. Scandals weathered, challenges overcome, a life built together stone by stone. And still, when he slipped into bed beside her and drew her into his arms, she felt the same flutter of joy she had felt on their wedding day, the same wonder that this impossible man was hers, the same gratitude that she had been brave enough to reach for happiness when it was offered. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I know." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too. More every day, which should not be possible but apparently is." Is that a complaint? It is an observation. My capacity for love appears to be infinite when it comes to you. This is alarming. You are a very alarming man. Thank you. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Sleep now. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, the harvest festival, the children, whatever chaos Sarah has planned for the week. Tonight, rest. She closed her eyes, letting his heartbeat steady her, letting his warmth soak into her bones. The challenges would come, as they always did, but she would face them with Sebastian at her side, and that made all the difference. In the morning, Rosalind woke to the sound of children's laughter echoing from the nursery and the smell of breakfast wafting from the kitchens below. Sebastian was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression that made her heart turn over. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Nothing. I was just thinking about lists." "At this hour?" "At every hour. It is an incurable condition." He smiled. "I was thinking about the list I made that first night. The one you laughed at. The one with the spelling error. The very same. I burned it, you know, after I proposed to you. I burned all of them, every list I had ever made ranking women by suitability, every calculation of advantage and disadvantage, every cold equation I had constructed to avoid feeling anything real. I remember. But I kept one thing, one document, from that night." He reached into the drawer of his bedside table and withdrew a folded paper, worn and creased from years of handling. "I kept the guest list, the one where I crossed out Lady Margaret Ashby's name and wrote in yours." Roselin took the paper with trembling fingers. There, in Sebastian's precise handwriting, was her maiden name, Miss Roselin Thorne, added to the bottom of a list of aristocrats and society beauties, squeezed into a space created by a crossed-out line. "You kept this." It was the moment everything changed, the moment I stopped being the calculating duke and started becoming the man I was meant to be. He took her hand, the one still holding the paper. "I know I was supposed to burn everything, but I could not bear to destroy the evidence of the best decision I ever made." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, ridiculous. She was always crying these days. The pregnancy made her emotions impossible to control, but she did not care. "You are a sentimental fool," she managed. "I am your sentimental fool. There is a difference." She laughed through her tears and leaned forward to kiss him, the old paper crackling between their joined hands. Outside, she could hear William shouting something about cricket and Catherine demanding her turn. In the nursery, baby Elizabeth was beginning her morning fuss. The household was stirring, the day beginning, another chapter of their life together starting to unfold. "I should get up," she said. "The children can wait 5 more minutes." Sebastian pulled her back down beside him. "I am not finished being sentimental." "You are never finished being sentimental. It is one of your many flaws." "You love my flaws." "I love you despite your flaws. There is a difference." "Is there?" He kissed her again slowly, thoroughly, as if they had all the time in the world. "I seem to recall a woman who once told me my methodology for selecting a wife was reductive. I believe she suggested I was missing something important. I stand by that assessment. As well you should. You were right. I was missing everything important. Love, connection, the willingness to be vulnerable with another person." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I was missing you. And now you have found me. Now I have found you. And I intend to spend every day of the rest of my life ensuring that I never lose you again." The children's noise was getting louder. Somewhere in the house, Sarah was calling for breakfast. The day was beginning in earnest, whether they were ready or not. Rosalind rose reluctantly, letting Sebastian help her navigate her ungainly figure out of bed. At the door, she paused and looked back at him, this impossible, wonderful man who had changed everything. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For adding my name to your list." His smile was brilliant, transformative, the smile she had fallen in love with in a moonlit garden 7 years ago. "Thank you for being impertinent enough to deserve it." She laughed and went to face the day, carrying with her the warmth of his love and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. In the study that evening, after the children were settled and the household quiet, Sebastian sat at his desk reviewing the latest reports from the estate manager. The harvest had been excellent this year, the tenants prospering, the improvements he had funded finally showing results. He thought about Lady Emmeline's dowry, the fortune he had once believed necessary to save Thornfield, and smiled. They had managed without it. They had always been going to manage without it. The estate was thriving, not because of a strategic marriage, but because of smart investment, careful management, and the simple truth that a man who loved his life was more likely to fight for it than one who merely endured it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Rosalind appeared in the doorway, a candle in her hand, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was wearing her nightdress, and the candlelight turned her copper curls to flame. "You are working too late," she said. "The reports will wait until morning. You are supposed to be resting." I was resting. I rested for hours. Now I am restless. She set the candle on his desk and perched on the edge, looking down at the papers before him. "What are you working on?" "Estate accounts, tenant assessments, the usual." "Lists?" He smiled. "Of a sort." She picked up the paper nearest to hand, a schedule of repairs needed for various tenant cottages, and studied it with the same critical eye she had once turned on his matrimonial rankings. "You have spelled necessary incorrectly," she observed. "Have I?" "You have. There are 2 S's. Sebastian rose from his chair and moved around the desk until he was standing before her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "You are correcting my spelling again." "Someone has to. Your education was clearly deficient." "My education was exemplary. I simply become distracted when beautiful women enter my study unannounced." He placed his hands on either side of her hips, caging her against the desk. "It has been a persistent problem." "Has it indeed?" 7 years now. Chronic condition. No known cure." "That sounds serious." "It is extremely serious." He leaned down until his lips were a breath away from hers. "I have learned to live with it." She closed the distance between them, kissing him with a passion that had not diminished over 7 years of marriage and 3 children, and all the chaos of building a life together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her eyes were bright with love and mischief. "I came to tell you something," she said. "Oh?" "The baby. I felt her move earlier today. A strong kick, right here." She took his hand and placed it on the swell of her belly. "Feel." He waited, his palm warm against her, and after a moment he felt it, a flutter of movement, a small life making its presence known. "Her?" he asked. "You are certain it is a girl?" "I am certain of nothing, but I have a feeling." She smiled. "What do you think of the name Margaret, after your mother?" "I think—" His voice caught. He had not expected the sudden rush of emotion, the way the name unlocked memories he had tried to bury for years. "I think she would have loved you, my mother. She would have adored you." "Tell me about her. You never speak of her." "Because it hurt too much. Because thinking about her meant thinking about everything I lost: my family, my capacity to feel, the man I might have become if they had lived." He rested his forehead against Rosalind's, letting her presence anchor him. She was warm, loving. She laughed easily and cried at sad stories and believed in the fundamental goodness of people. My father did not deserve her, but she loved him anyway. "She sounds wonderful." She was. And I spent 10 years trying to forget her because remembering was too painful. He pulled back, meeting Rosalind's eyes. "You gave me permission to remember again. You gave me permission to feel. I did not know how much I needed that until you offered it. I gave you nothing you did not already have. You had only buried it. Same thing. Without you, it would have stayed buried forever." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "Margaret, it is. If the baby is a girl, and if it is a boy, Then we shall name him after your brother, Henry, if you wish it." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Henry had been his best friend, his protector, his idol. Losing him had been like losing a limb, a constant phantom pain that never quite healed. "Henry," he repeated. "Yes, I wish it." They stayed there for a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms in the candle-lit study, surrounded by lists and ledgers and all the evidence of a life well lived. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, they were home. In the corner of the room, half hidden behind a stack of agricultural reports, lay a worn leather journal. Sebastian had started keeping it 3 months after their wedding, a different kind of list, a record not of calculations, but of blessings. "Reasons I love my wife," the first page read. Volume 1. There were 17 volumes now, filled with small observations and grand declarations, mundane details and profound revelations. The way she laughed at his jokes even when they were not funny. The way she argued with him about estate policy and was usually right. The way she held their children, the way she cared for the tenants, the way she had transformed Thornfield from a mausoleum into a home. The final entry in the most recent volume, written just yesterday, read simply, "Because she makes the world make sense." In the margins, added in Roselin's hand when she had discovered the journal and insisted on contributing, was a single line, "Because he lets me win every argument." And below that, in Sebastian's writing, "Only the ones that matter." It was a ridiculous document, sentimental, excessive, exactly the kind of emotional indulgence that the calculating Duke of 7 years ago would have scorned. Sebastian would not have traded it for anything in the world. The candle guttered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Rosalind had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing slow and even, her hand still resting on the swell where their 4th child grew. Sebastian held her gently, carefully, feeling the warmth of her against him and the quiet rhythm of her heart. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. But inside the ancient walls of Thornfield Abbey, inside the circle of Sebastian's arms, inside the life they had built together, there was nothing but love. He would add that to the list tomorrow. Right now, he simply wanted to hold his wife and count his blessings and feel, with absolute certainty, that he had found exactly what he had spent his whole life looking for. Rosalind stirred against him, murmuring something in her sleep. "What was that?" he whispered. "Spelled it wrong again," she mumbled. "Ridiculous man." Sebastian laughed softly and kissed her hair. Some things, it seemed, never changed, and some things, the important things, the things that mattered, were worth every moment of the journey it took to find them.